And it's a simple true or false question. People who are underweight or normal weight, so in terms of BMI, they cannot develop type 2 diabetes mellitus. In other words, that means you must be overweight or obese to develop diabetes mellitus. Wow, looks like we have almost consensus with this one. And pretty much everyone said false, and everyone is correct. Yes, so the thing is that even if you're underweight or normal weight, you can still develop type 2 diabetes mellitus. So it's very interesting. So diabetes mellitus and obesity, they're definitely linked. And about 90% of people who have type 2 diabetes are either overweight or they're obese. But again, that leaves 10% of people who have type 2 diabetes mellitus, but they're normal weight or underweight. So you can still develop diabetes mellitus even though you're not technically overweight or obese by BMI standards. So the thing is that obesity doesn't explain all of diabetes. Yes, most people with type 2 diabetes are obese or overweight, but it doesn't explain it all. So it doesn't guarantee that you will get so the other thing is that if you're obese, doesn't mean that you will develop type 2 diabetes mellitus, and it's inevitable. But the thing is about roughly a third of Americans who have an obese BMI, they also have type 2 diabetes mellitus. And the interesting thing is I think that's the thing about using statistics. I have to research what's the latest statistics. So from the 2020 report, they said in 2018, just a little over 34 million American adults, so that's 13% of American adults have diabetes mellitus. And of that, about 26 million are diagnosed, and this is a crazy thing. Over 7 million have type 2 diabetes, but they're undiagnosed. So this is the estimated, what they do based on population statistics. So this is an interesting thing. Obesity and type 2 diabetes, they're linked, so most people with type 2 diabetes are obese, but not everyone who is obese has diabetes mellitus. So how does that work? Yeah, so then the way to represent it is this way. So this was what year was this? I have to update this pot number as well. But I like to represent it via diagram visually. So this is the entire US population in this little circle. And this is the percent of the population that's obese. So I'm representing by area. So yeah, if we had everybody cramming into this little circle, this would be had everyone who has a overweight or obese BMI gather in another circle. This would be the area of that circle. So yeah, 219 people, million of us Americans are overweight or obese. And then of those people, there's a subset who have the obese BMI. So then a BMI over 30. So 114 million. Now, of those people, how many type 2 diabetics do we have? So this is a diabetic population, 29.1 million. So again, not the majority of the American population, but still a pretty significant area. So if we overlap the obese population and the population that has type 2 diabetes, what we see is that in this one, notice that in the diabetic population, most of the people overlap with the obese population. But there is that small 10%-ish, around 10%, that don't have an obese BMI, but they're still diabetic. Whereas in the people who have obese BMI, notice that most of them are not diabetic. So everyone who's not in that blue circle, these are people who have an obese BMI, but they're not diabetic. So this is kind of works out. Most people who are diabetic are obese, but not everyone who's obese is diabetic. So that's how it kind of works out. They're not one and the same. And the thing is so did obesity predispose them to diabetes, or did diabetes mellitus predispose someone to obesity? And this is something that's pretty much a lot of diabetic research is being done. What is the role of both? And is it chicken or egg? Is obesity the cause, or is it the symptom, or is diabetes the cause, or is it the symptom? So which came first? So this is the thing is it's a hot topic in research, and this is sometimes they just, in addition to the metabolic syndrome, there's a term called diabesity, and whenever I'd say in class, like there's people like they laugh and they're like, this sounds so like it. They think I'm making it up, but look up diabesity in any scientific database, and there's a lot of people. It's gaining traction because the two are so. It's almost impossible to like. The more we research, the more we find more links. So it's kind of hard to separate them. That's why I think like it's kind of like not just separate things, but it's things that when you have diabetes and obesity, they kind of like when they play off each other to such an extent, it's hard to separate each other. So many of the physiological and cellular features, like all those signaling pathways, many of the same like enzymes and chemicals are activated in both diabetes and obesity. So many of those, especially insulin signaling, you find that in both. And this is kind of a new term that, again, is like, it sounds made up, and it was made up, but it's now being taken more seriously. But what about the people who don't have obese BMI or overweight BMI, yet they still have diabetes mellitus? Yeah, so type 1, I have to look up that whether someone with type 1 has their long-term chances of or their body composition as they age. That's an interesting question, or maybe that's something you can research. Okay, so then what else can cause diabetes? So then genetics and family history, especially with type 2 diabetes. If you have one parent with type 2 diabetes mellitus, this is a 40%, statistically, people who have one parent with type 2 diabetes, they have a 40% lifetime chance of developing type 2 diabetes themselves. But if both parents have type 2 diabetes, that means you're at more risk. Again, this isn't a 100% chance. Just because both your parents have type 2 diabetes does not mean you will and you're doomed to have type 2 diabetes mellitus. It just means like if you want to avoid and minimize your risk, you might have to pay attention to your risk factors and diet and lifestyle more than somebody who doesn't have a family history. So again, lifestyle, this is one big difference between type 1 diabetes mellitus and type 2 diabetes mellitus. Like the type 1 diabetics, they need the insulin. I mean, if they don't have the insulin, they can do all the nutrition they want, but that's not going to help them. But type 2, but they still have to watch their nutrition, but they need that insulin, period. With type 2 diabetes, so things like being sedentary, so lack of physical activity, and a diet high in calories or high glycemic index. That's why glycemic index, there's a lot of research being done because they see like, okay, you can eat the same amount of carbs, but if you have a diet that's higher or has a lot of these high glycemic index, that means your blood sugar spikes really fast, and then, so that it spikes really high. That predisposes you to type 2 diabetes. And body composition as well, so things like how much fat you have in your body fat percentage. And other things as well, endocrine disorders. So things like cortisol. Remember, cortisol breaks down a lot of these tissues and macronutrients into other nutrients, and including breaking down glycogen into glucose and stimulating gluconeogenesis, right? Yeah, and are you going to be tested on the percentages? I usually don't test you on populational percentages because, again, they change from year to year. But I think the big point that you should be focused on is like diabetes, and the point I'm trying to make is diabetes affects a lot of people. It's an epidemic. So this is why it's a very important topic, and this is why I spend so many lectures on it. And then acromegaly, so that's growth hormone. Growth hormone also affects blood sugar as well. And hyperthyroidism, that also causes that can affect cause diabetes as well.